the moment my brother-in-law slid that paper across the kitchen table and told me to sign it or get out of his house. I realized something I should have seen years earlier. He genuinely believed I had no other options. He wasn't entirely wrong about one thing. I had spent 4 years convincing myself that staying quiet was the same as keeping the peace, that absorbing every insult, every dismissal, every decision made without me was just what marriage looked like when you married into a family like his. I told myself that was love, that was loyalty, that was being a good wife. What it actually was, I understand now, was slow erosion. My name is Teresa. I was 31 years old when everything fell apart at a Sunday dinner in my in-laws' house in Columbus, Ohio. My husband and I had been married for 4 years. We had no children, which, as it turned out, was the only piece of good fortune I hadn't recognized yet. My husband, whose name I'll give you in a moment, was not a cruel man. I want to be clear about that because the story I'm about to tell you is complicated, and complicated stories get flattened into simple ones when people want easy villains. He wasn't a villain. He was a man who had spent 34 years learning that his older brother's opinion was the final word on everything, and that lesson had calcified into something he no longer questioned. His brother was another matter entirely. Nate was 40 years old, the eldest of 3 siblings, and he had run the family's finances for as long as anyone could remember. His parents were older, retired, living on a fixed income with some savings that Nate managed for them. He co-signed on things. He organized things. He made himself indispensable in the way that some people do when control is the only currency they know how to spend. My husband's name was Joel. Joel was kind to me in private. He brought me coffee in the mornings without being asked. He remembered small things, the kind of person I was in the quiet moments between all the family noise. But the second Nate walked into a room, Joel became someone else. Quieter, smaller, deferential in a way that made my chest tighten every single time. The problems had been building for years before the Sunday that changed everything. When Joel and I bought our house, a 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood we had chosen together, Nate had opinions about the neighborhood. The price, the timing, the terms of the mortgage, and the color of the front door. Joel listened to all of it. Some of it he repeated back to me as his own ideas, until I stopped being able to tell where Nate's thinking ended, and Joel's began. When I got a promotion at work and we decided to celebrate at a nice restaurant, Nate made a comment at the table about how women in demanding careers made difficult wives. He said it lightly, like it was a joke, like it was nothing. My mother-in-law laughed. My father-in-law stirred his iced tea. Joel looked at his menu. I had learned by then not to respond directly. Every time I pushed back, I became the problem. I was sensitive. I was overreacting. I didn't understand how their family communicated, so I smiled. I let it pass. I filed it away in the same mental drawer where I kept all the other moments I wasn't supposed to make a big deal about. That drawer was very full by the time we got to the Sunday in question. It started as a normal visit. Joel's parents hosted dinner every few weeks, and we drove the 20 minutes to their house in Westerville, carrying a pie I had baked from scratch. Apple, my father-in-law's favorite. I had been making it since our 2nd year of marriage, because I noticed he lit up every time I brought it. And I am, despite everything, a person who genuinely enjoys making people feel cared for. Nate was already there when we arrived, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the folder sitting on the kitchen table. It was a thick folder, the kind with a metal clasp at the top. I noticed it immediately, and then made myself stop looking at it because my instincts had gotten good at recognizing trouble before it announced itself. We sat down to eat. Pot roast, green beans, the dinner rolls from the bakery my mother-in-law liked. The conversation was ordinary at first. My father-in-law asked about my job. My mother-in-law mentioned a neighbor who had moved away. Nate talked about a deal he was working on, something vague having to do with a property he was looking at. And then, after the dishes were cleared and the pie was served, Nate picked up the folder. He set it in the center of the table, the way someone sets down a verdict. "We need to talk about the house," he said. I looked at Joel. Joel was looking at the folder. What Nate explained, calmly, and with the authority of someone who had never once been told no, was that his parents were going to need more financial support in the coming years. Medical costs, home maintenance, things that added up. He had been reviewing the family's assets, and he said the word, felt like it was a generous gift he was offering, that Joel and I selling our house and moving into a smaller rental would free up equity that could help support everyone. He had a figure in mind. A specific number. He had, in fact, already spoken to a real estate agent. The room was very quiet. I understood, in that moment, that this conversation had happened before I arrived. That everyone sitting at this table had already discussed it. That the only person who had not been consulted about the plan to sell the house that my name was also on, the house I had helped choose and helped pay for and had spent 4 years making into a home, was me. I set down my fork. "When did this get decided?" I asked. My voice was even. I had practiced evenness for 4 years. Nate looked at me with an expression I had seen before. Patient. Slightly tired. The expression of a man who finds it exhausting to explain obvious things. "Nothing is decided. We're discussing." "You spoke to a real estate agent," I said. "Just to get some numbers." I looked at Joel again. He was looking at the table. "Joel," I said. Not loudly. Quietly, "Did you know about this before tonight?" He didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. When he finally spoke, he said, "Nate just wanted to get the family together to talk through some options." Some options. The phrase landed in my stomach like a stone. My mother-in-law reached over and patted my hand. "Nobody is forcing anything, sweetheart. We're just trying to think about the future. Together," Nate added. And the way he said together made it sound like I was the one being divisive by objecting. I said, very carefully, that Joel and I would need to discuss this privately before any further conversations about our house took place. I said it with as much composure as I had, which was considerable, because I had trained myself over 4 years to be composed in exactly these situations. Nate leaned back in his chair. "Theresa," he said, "nobody's asking you to do anything unreasonable. This is family. This is about taking care of each other." "I understand that," I said. "And our home is also part of our family's future. It's not a fund." The silence that followed was the particular kind of silence that happens when someone says a true thing in a room full of people who don't want to hear it. Nate's expression changed. It didn't harden exactly, it sharpened. He picked up the folder and placed it directly in front of me. "There's a signature page at the back," he said. "It's just to authorize a formal appraisal. Harmless. It doesn't commit to anything." I didn't open the folder. "I'm not signing anything tonight." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Joel, and I watched something pass between them. A look I couldn't fully read but recognized as the look of a conversation that had already been had. Then Nate said, "Sign the paper, or you can find somewhere else to be." The room went completely still. I don't know what he expected. I think he expected what had always happened before, that I would feel the social pressure of the room, the disapproval of my in-laws, the discomfort on Joel's face, and I would fold. I would say something to smooth it over. I would find a way to make everyone comfortable again at my own expense. I had done it so many times that it had stopped feeling like a choice. It just felt like what happened next. But something was different that night. Maybe it was the real estate agent who had already been called. Maybe it was the folder with the signature page Nate had prepared in advance. Maybe it was the look on Joel's face. Not distressed, not apologetic, just waiting to see which way this would go. Maybe it was the apple pie I had baked, sitting half-eaten on a plate, while a man who didn't own my house told me to sign over the right to appraise it or leave the table. I picked up my purse. I stood up. I looked at Joel and I said quietly, "I'll be in the car." And then I walked out. Joel came out 20 minutes later. He didn't look angry. He looked the way he usually looked after those dinners, tired. A little relieved it was over, and already preparing for the version of events he would present to me. He got in the driver's seat and started the car without saying anything. We were halfway home before he spoke. "You embarrassed me in there." I looked out the passenger window at the highway lights. I didn't sign a document authorizing the sale of our house at a dinner I wasn't told about in advance. It was an appraisal. It's not a sale. It was the first step toward a sale that your brother had already planned. He's trying to help the family. I had heard that sentence so many times. It was the sentence that ended every conversation, the full stop that meant I was supposed to nod and move on. Nate was trying to help the family. Whatever Nate did, he was trying to help, and any resistance I offered was, by implication, a failure to want to help. "Joel," I said, "your brother sat down at that table with a folder and a real estate agent's number and a signature page already prepared about a house that belongs to both of us, and you didn't tell me it was coming." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't want you to worry about it ahead of time." That was when I understood something I had been circling around for years without being able to name it. Joel wasn't choosing Nate over me because he was a bad husband. He was choosing Nate over me because choosing Nate was what his life had been built around. And he had never once examined whether that foundation made any sense. He couldn't protect me from Nate because he had never learned to question him. And he never would. Not as long as things stayed the way they were. I didn't argue that night. I went to bed early and lay in the dark for a long time, looking at the ceiling of the house I had helped pay for. In the neighborhood I had helped choose, thinking about what it would mean to stop waiting for things to change. The next morning, while Joel was at work, I called my college roommate, whose husband was a family law attorney in Cincinnati. I want to be specific about this, because I know what happens when women tell stories like mine. People immediately start wondering about the legalities, about what was allowed, about who had the right to what. So let me address it now, the way I wish the story I related to my friend Melissa had addressed it. My roommate's husband spent 45 minutes on the phone with me, at no charge, because he is a genuinely decent person. He explained in clear and straightforward terms that my name was on the deed to our house. That meant no appraisal, no listing, no sale could happen without my signature. Nothing Nate had brought to that table had any legal weight without my consent. I had more protection than I had realized. I just hadn't known enough to look for it. He also explained what a separation of marital assets would look like if it came to that. Not divorce, not yet, just information. What I was entitled to, what the process looked like, how long it typically took. I listened to all of it and I wrote everything down in a notebook I kept in my work bag where Joel would never think to look. The week after the dinner, Nate called 3 times. I let it go to voicemail all 3 times. His messages were patient, measured, and utterly confident that I would eventually come around. The 3rd message ended with, "Teresa, I just want to make sure we're all on the same team here." I played that one back twice. Joel, meanwhile, behaved as if nothing unusual had happened. He went to work, he came home. He mentioned once that his mom had said I seemed upset. Not that I had a reason to be upset, just that I seemed it. As if my feelings were weather, something to be noted and waited out. I thought about what I needed, not what would smooth things over. Not what would make Joel comfortable. Not what Nate would find acceptable. What I, Teresa, needed, in order to have a life that made sense. I made a list, not a dramatic list, just practical things. A financial advisor who could help me understand my own assets independent of what Joel and I held jointly. A therapist, which I had been putting off for 2 years because the appointments felt like an admission of something I wasn't ready to name. A conversation with my own family, my parents in Michigan, who didn't know the full picture of what my marriage had become, because I had protected everyone from it for so long. I started making calls. The financial advisor was a woman named, and I'm using her name, because she gave me permission, Bonnie. And she worked out of a small office near downtown Columbus and had the calm, direct manner of someone who has heard every version of this story and has learned to skip the part where you're embarrassed about it. She looked at my income, my credit history, the equity in the house, and the accounts Joel and I held together. She asked me what I wanted the next 5 years to look like. I stared at her for a moment because no one had asked me that in a very long time. I started therapy the following week. My therapist's name was also something I'll keep private, but what she said to me in our first session has stayed with me the way certain sentences do. She said, "You've been describing a marriage. What I'm hearing is a management system." She wasn't wrong. For the next 6 weeks, I was very quiet at home. I answered Joel's questions. I went to work. I cooked dinner twice a week the way I always had. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, I was building something. Carefully and methodically, the way you build anything that has to hold weight. Joel noticed I was quieter, but attributed it to the tension with his family, which in his understanding meant the tension I was creating. He mentioned twice that it would be nice if I reached out to his mother. I said I would think about it. I did not reach out to his mother. Nate stopped calling after the third message, but sent a single email that was 4 paragraphs long and referenced, with impressive specificity, every financial decision Joel and I had made since our marriage, citing these as evidence that he had always been looking out for us. I read it once. I forwarded it to my attorney contact in Cincinnati with a note that said, "For the record." The night before I was ready to have the conversation with Joel, I sat at the kitchen table alone after he had gone to bed. I had a folder of my own by then. It wasn't dramatic. It was just paper. Documents, account statements, the consultation notes from my attorney, a printout of the house's assessed value, which, as it turned out, was considerably higher than what Nate had mentioned at the dinner table. I sat with all of it for a long time, not feeling triumphant, not feeling relieved yet, just feeling the specific weight of having finally done the work. The next morning over coffee, I told Joel I wanted to talk. He looked up from his phone with the expression of a man who knew this conversation was coming, and had been hoping it wouldn't. I laid it out simply. I was not going to agree to an appraisal, a sale, or any financial decision that benefited his family at the cost of our assets without a full and transparent conversation between the two of us, conducted privately, without Nate in the room. I said that if he wanted to help his parents financially, I was genuinely open to discussing what we could reasonably contribute. I said I had spoken to an attorney and understood my rights as a co-owner of the property. I said I had also been speaking to a therapist and was beginning to understand some patterns in our marriage that I thought we needed to address together, and I hoped he would be willing to do that with me. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You talked to a lawyer?" "I talked to a lawyer. Without telling me?" "You scheduled a meeting about our house without telling me." He didn't have an answer for that. What happened next was not a movie moment. It was not a dramatic confrontation. It was a long, uncomfortable, overdue conversation that lasted 3 hours and covered things we had not said out loud in years. Joel cried once, which surprised me. I had not seen him cry in our 4 years of marriage. Not at anything. The crying did not make me take back what I said, but it made me softer in how I said it. Because I do not believe in grinding people down. I believe in telling the truth and then giving people room to respond to it. I told him that I loved him, but that I could not keep living in a marriage where a third party had more authority over our decisions than I did. I told him that I was not interested in making his brother the villain of our story, but that I needed Joel to actually become, my partner. Not sometimes. Not when it was convenient. Not when Nate wasn't in the room. He asked me what that would look like. I told him I had made a list. He laughed, a little, at that. He knows I make lists. It was the first moment in the conversation that felt like us. Like the people we were when it was just the two of us, and none of the noise. Couples therapy started the following month. Our therapist was a man named, again keeping it private, someone Joel had agreed to because I had offered him the choice of a therapist or a conversation with my attorney about next steps. Not as a threat, but as a clarification. These were the 2 paths forward. He chose the therapy. We went every week for 7 months. I will not pretend it was easy, or that Joel transformed overnight into a different person. He didn't. What he did was, slowly and with visible effort, start to recognize the patterns. The way Nate's calls would change his mood for the rest of the day. The way certain topics in our house had invisible fences around them that he'd built without realizing it. The way he had been managing my feelings about his family, rather than actually addressing the cause of those feelings. About 2 months into therapy, he had a conversation with Nate that I was not present for. I don't know exactly what was said. What I know is that Nate called me the following evening, and it was the first time he had called me directly in months. His voice was different. Not warm. Nate was not a particularly warm person, but different. Careful. He said he understood he had overstepped at dinner. He said the folder had been a mistaken approach. He did not say he was wrong to want to help his parents. He did not, and I did not expect him to, say he had been wrong about me all these years. But he said what he said, and I listened, and I thanked him for the call. After I hung up, I sat with it for a while. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Relieved, but tired the way you are after carrying something heavy for a long distance and finally being allowed to set it down. What I want to tell you, because I think it matters, is what I did not do. I did not sell the house. I did not sign the paper. I did not leave quietly without saying anything. But I also did not burn everything down. I did not make Nate into a public enemy, or spend years refusing to be in the same room with him. That is not because I forgave everything instantly, or because I am a particularly forgiving person. It is because I decided at some point in those 6 weeks of very quiet rebuilding that I was not interested in spending the rest of my life defined by that Sunday dinner. I was interested in building something better. Joel and his brother still talk. I did not ask Joel to cut Nate off. What I asked was that certain decisions, our decisions, the decisions that belong to the family Joel and I make together, stay inside our family. That boundary has held. Not perfectly. Not without the occasional moment where I can see Joel being pulled in directions he's still learning to resist. But it holds more than it didn't before. Our house is still ours. We have not had it appraised. We have not discussed selling it. His parents have been helped in other ways. Ways that Joel and I decided together, with a number we agreed on, transferred monthly in a way that we both track and can discuss openly. It is not what Nate had in mind. It works for us. There is something I think about sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. When I'm baking on a Sunday morning, or sitting in the quiet of our living room. And I can remember, clearly, what it felt like to be in that kitchen in Westerville, with a folder being pushed across the table toward me. I think about the version of me who would have signed it. She wasn't weak, that version. She was just exhausted and confused, and had convinced herself that her discomfort was less important than everyone else's. She had spent 4 years discussing that particular form of self-erasure until it felt like virtue. I feel tenderness for her now. I also feel relief every time that I pushed the folder back. The night Nate told me to sign the paper or get out of his house, he thought he was giving me an ultimatum. A closed door. A hard wall I'd eventually lean against long enough to slide down. He didn't understand that I had spent 6 weeks, quietly and methodically, building my own door, and when I was ready, I walked through it.